The Sutra of Relationships, the Law of Beginning. When starting something, it's better to agree on everything from the shore. A shared understanding of responsibilities, roles, advantages, opportunities, risks, profits, and losses can prevent many problems. People typically start a joint business by discussing how they'll divide profits. But it's wise to first agree on how to divide losses. Let's say the company's capital is $100,000, and we estimate our contribution resources, knowledge, experience, connections at $20,000, which gives us 20% ownership of the company. And under favorable circumstances, our future profit would also be 20%. But imagine the business doesn't succeed, the company goes bankrupt, and debts pile up, with creditors knocking at the door. In this case, as 20% shareholders, we would need to contribute $20,000 to cover the losses. This is something that needs to be understood from the very beginning. Whenever starting any important endeavor, whether it's a business or a marriage, you need to agree on everything from the start. Most conflicts in families and internal corporate wars arise because people left something unsaid, unnegotiated, or unwritten at the beginning. Even if partners have been friends since kindergarten, they still need to sit down and clearly outline what each person is bringing to the project: money, connections, intellectual property, how to assess these contributions in percentage terms, and how much each will owe if things don't work out. This principle applies to the family project as well. Experience shows that families with a prenuptial agreement tend to last longer and live more happily. On one hand, it may seem harsh to build personal relationships based on a contract. But on the other hand, there's a belief that even children should be raised under a contract model. It's suggested that if a child receives pocket money not just because, but as a reward for completing tasks, they will grow up to be a responsible person who is pleasant to deal with. Along the way, they might also develop an entrepreneurial spirit. Projects that are thoroughly discussed from both positive and negative angles at the outset tend to have better prospects and provide additional motivation. Bonum initium est dimidium facti. A good beginning is half the battle, says a Latin proverb. This is especially true for all kinds of collective, public ventures. In such cases, it is crucial from the beginning to define the roles and functions of each participant, their rights and responsibilities, and areas of accountability, and to agree on the risks. In European tradition, the first instance of such a contractual approach can be traced back to the early colonization projects of the ancient Greeks, when the citizens of free-spirited city-states embarked on expeditions to the far reaches of the Mediterranean and the Black Sea. Trade with distant colonies and peoples on the periphery of ancient civilization was accompanied by the creation of the first joint stock companies, where participants agreed on both the risks and rewards of joint ventures. In medieval times, the precursors to joint stock companies were various partnerships and merchant guilds. From these partnerships, particularly maritime ones, the Dutch and English East India Companies emerged in the early 17th century, which became prototypes for modern corporations. A distinctive feature of the English East India Company was its well-developed system of corporate governance and defined rights and obligations of shareholders. Annual general meetings were held where decisions were made by majority shareholder vote. Only those who had owned shares for at least a year, and whose shares met a certain value threshold, were allowed to vote. In the beginning, every matter is strict. He who breaks the contract releases the other party from any obligation. P. Boast. Small beginnings, great value. Despite the negative evaluations of the East India Company as a tool of British imperialism, it is important to recognize the colossal role it played in organizing and developing corporate enterprises, creating principles of governance and self-regulation. And it all began with agreements on joint activities, which, more than 2.5 centuries ago, established the primary roles and responsibilities. The dependency of overall benefit on coordinated action is well illustrated by the research of Elinor Ostrom, Nobel Prize laureate in Economics, 2009, for her study on the collective management of common resources. For example, using communal land for grazing livestock can be detrimental if each member tries to secretly cut more hay for themselves, without considering the interests of others. Soon, the land will no longer be suitable for grazing at all. Situations where a person must forego immediate personal gain for the benefit of the group, in order to reap delayed benefits in the future, are known as social dilemmas. Preliminary agreements also mitigate most negative human factors that arise in conflict situations. We often argue with our partners and companions, mistakenly believing that people we consider close will always and in everything automatically agree with us and act according to our assumptions. But that is far from the case. Therefore, in any venture, one key to success is the ability to negotiate from the start, to understand what your partner wants and to be able to clearly articulate your own vision and wishes, being specific. Beginnings matter most. Contracts exist so that the weaker party is the one who must uphold them. Carol A. Peck. Agreements are the project's best friend. Psychologist Walter Reitman believes that attempting to identify and analyze the initial characteristics, goals, and objectives of both sides, as well as the difficulties that might arise, can greatly simplify reaching a consensus, identify potential problems, and avoid them in the future. James Greenough, the creator of problem-solving methods, writes that the ability to come up with several possible solutions and to break down a situation into smaller parts for step-by-step analysis makes discussions more effective. Among the many options offered by both sides, common ground will surely be found, which will help formulate a unified course of action. Even in the animal kingdom, we can observe how genetic programs of obedience and cooperation guide members toward forming rules and laws for coexistence. Ethology, the study of animal behavior, has discovered deep similarities between the social organization of herd animals and human society. Both are organized according to a hierarchical principle. As relationships of dominance and submission form, mutual social agitation gives way to a stable and viable behavioral structure. Every time people find themselves in a new environment or join a group to accomplish specific tasks and goals, a new hierarchy and system of agreements form, where everyone has a role and certain responsibilities. Rules are the guarantee of a population's survival. Without them, our innate behavioral programs, such as competition and the desire to dominate, will always lead to discord, inevitably affecting results. In traditional societies, religion became the regulator and source of rules. For example, the Quran prohibits breaking promises and agreements in order to protect people from conflicts. Fulfill your agreements, for agreements will be questioned about. Quran 17:34. If a person breaks a contract, committing a sinful act forbidden by Islam, it leads to negative consequences, and the person is deprived of blessings. Allah does not further the work of transgressors. Quran 10:81. The development of advanced societies has always moved from the dominance of status to the dominance of contract. Henry Maine. Once started poorly, it won't end well. Any agreement, as the beginning of some new venture, in Islam requires Allah's blessing for its successful completion. Therefore, Muslims begin any task with the words Bismillah, which translates from Arabic as in the name of Allah. With these words, a person, on the one hand, asks for divine blessing and, on the other hand, calls upon the Almighty as a witness to the commitments being made. This means that the participants in the agreement are accountable not only to each other but primarily to Allah. In Christianity, covenants and commandments are nothing less than agreements between people and God. Through angels, prophets, and His Son Jesus Christ, the Lord established a covenant with mankind. The latter takes on the responsibility of fulfilling the divine commandments, and in return, gains the opportunity to enter the kingdom of heaven. The Bible mentions 7 such covenants. The first covenant was made by God with Adam and Eve, General 1:28-31, 2:16-17. However, people broke it, for which they were expelled from Eden, thus committing the original sin. People continued to sin, leading God to annul the covenant and send the flood, from which only the righteous Noah and his sons were saved. With them, God made the second covenant, General 9:1. The third covenant was made with Abraham, General 12:1-3, the fourth with Moses, when he received the 10 Commandments on Mount Sinai, Exodus 20:1-17, and the laws of life for the chosen Jewish people. The fifth covenant was with King David, 2 Sam 23:5. The sixth was between God and the civil temple community in the post-exilic period, 458-457 BC, NA 938. The New Testament speaks of the seventh covenant between God and humanity through the sacrificial death of Jesus Christ, which is summarized by Jesus in the Sermon on the Mount, Matt 5:6-7. A bold beginning is no worse than a victory. A promise is better than money. If you make a promise, you won't quarrel later. Shake hands to seal the deal. There is also a separate agreement made by those who decide to dedicate their lives to God. Monks. The initial understanding of the vows that novices take when preparing for monastic tonsure is crucial in Christian monasticism. The guidelines for monastic life in the Orthodox Church state, the candidate for tonsure must understand the importance of monastic vows. The abbot must explain to the candidates the meaning and significance of monastic tonsure. When the time for tonsure comes, the abbot, calling those who wish to be tonsured, explains to them the monastic vows, the struggles and sufferings from the enemy's temptations that will come after tonsure, and how to withstand and overcome them. Those taking the small habit should recognize that tonsure requires humility and repentance, a recognition of oneself as the least in the monastery and servant to all, and it does not grant a privileged position in the monastery. It also specifies the consequences, canonical penalties, punishments, for those who abandon monasticism, so that the Christian is fully aware from the outset of the responsibilities and risks. One of the religious teachings that first proclaimed the principle of the social contract as the foundation of the state is Buddhism. According to the Buddhist concept of power, the king is not only a ruler but also an intermediary and regulator of social order. If he is unjust, he brings misfortune to his subjects. A monarch who does not follow the Dharma and does not observe the highest moral standards leads the country to ruin. In such a case, he loses the right to power, and the people have the right to overthrow or kill him. This Buddhist concept of royal power contrasts sharply with the ancient Indian concept of the god king. Word is law, hold on to it as you would to a pillar. Whoever is part of the deal is also responsible for it. An oral agreement isn't worth the paper it's written on. Samuel Goldwyn. Buddhism questions the legitimacy of power, asserting its dependence on moral laws, and legally places this power under the control of the Sangha as the guardian and interpreter of moral laws. Moreover, while the Brahmanical caste system represents divine order, in Buddhism, it is seen as a result of a kind of social contract. Buddhism rejects the doctrine of caste divinity and its exclusive focus on secular royal power. Interestingly, all the major pre-Islamic Indian empires, the Maurya and Gupta states, were either Buddhist or patrons of Buddhism. To the Brahmanical idea of the divine king, Devaraja, Buddhism opposed the idea of a king ruling based on Dharma, the principles of Buddhist teaching, Dharmaraja. More than 1,000 years after Buddhism disappeared from India, it has returned as a key component of soft power diplomacy in modern India. In Judaism, the contract also has a special ritual significance. For example, the ketubah, the Jewish marriage contract, is an integral part of a traditional Jewish wedding. A contract between falsehood and truth is always made at the expense of the truth itself. J. Massillon. A spoken promise is sacred. Where there is a lot of protocol, there is little action. The American folk tale The Failed Proposal highlights how important it is to consider all factors before entering into an agreement. A young Yankee came to propose to a rich farmer's daughter. He had already discussed everything with his beloved and now came to her father to ask for her hand. The conversation was difficult for young Jonathan, what Yankees are jokingly called, and from nervousness, he whittled a stick in his hand. The old farmer listened carefully and watched his movements. Jonathan kept carving the stick until it was reduced to shavings. The father said, "Well, young man, I see you're capable and have good manners, but I won't give you my daughter. If you had made something useful out of that stick, I'd have given her to you. But you just whittled it away to nothing. I can see your character clearly. You'll waste your fortune bit by bit until nothing is left, and your family will be in need. That's my answer. Our lives are shaped by how we perceive them." In English, it's shorter, perception is reality. This was understood even by Marcus Aurelius, who said that we often live in a world of illusions, and when reality breaks through, we get upset. Those with more common sense in their view of the future are content with their lives. They aren't thrown off balance when marriage or business doesn't turn out exactly as imagined. A clear contract can help avoid disappointments and unrealistic expectations better than any self-help techniques. Why leave room for unpleasant surprises or misunderstandings with partners or spouses? Let the contract handle that, leaving us free to enjoy achieving our mutual goals. An agreement made in good faith can't be taken away, not even by a patriarch. Empty words hinder action. Once said, "It's as good as written down." A good start is half the battle won.